Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I add another postcard to my postcard series. And if you've been following along, you know that I am attempting to follow the stylings of Beatrix Potter, and this card is no different. We are, as always, starting off with some lining. I am using my Sailor Fude de Mannen pen, and I'll have all that information down below. Some of you have asked about the ink that I use, and I'm going to have that information down below. I'm not going to show the entire inking process, just a little bit. And you'll notice, the reason I wanted to do this, you'll notice that I am flipping my pen where I am drawing with it normal like now, and then I'll flip it upside down. Flipping it upside down allows me to get those smaller lines on there, and I wanted you to see that close up before we start with the rest of the process. And if you've been following along on these, you know with the Beatrix Potter art, I do try to put a tea glaze on there or a wash on there before I start painting to give the paper kind of an aged look. And this particular tea is a chai tea, and I wanted to see, because it has more of an orange tint, and in our last video, and I'll link that down below for you, but I'll link the whole series below and you can take a look. In the last video I talked about how the different kinds of tea look different on the paper, so it changes the way your art looks depending on which tea you use. So last time I used a blueberry green tea, and the time before that I used an Earl Grey. So this time I am using the chai. Before we get started with the rest of the process, just doing a little untaping here, I do want to look at those teas together. So on the far left hand side we do have the Earl Grey, in the center is the chai, and then on the right hand side with the mums, that is the blueberry green tea. So you can see there is a slight difference between each of them. Now I do apologize, it was kind of a cloudy day, but there, take my word for it, there's a difference between them, and that does affect the watercolor depending on what color you lay down underneath. So we are getting started with the process, and I have my new favorite brush. This is a size 6 round from the Winsor Newton. Then I have my Winsor Newton paints, and these are in my own little palette. I switched them out. And then I also have my paper where I swatched these colors, and I'll link that down below. I have a cup of water and a microfiber cloth. So in the upper left hand corner, there it is, that's our reference photo, and I'll have the colors on the screen for you. I am starting with the 2 yellows, so we're going to do a base color of yellow on this fern, and right in the center where all the ferns come together, it looks like a hot mess. So I'm hoping, as I'm starting this process of laying these colors down, that it's going to help me work that all out in the center. So if you want me to post this, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and post it on my blog, and I'll have that link below. And if you want to do this on your own, draw it on your own, you'll have that reference down there. I will also post my drawing for it. I will tell you though, that area in the center is probably going to take you some time. I had to draw it and redraw it several times, but I'll get you a good copy down there below. But what I am starting with is the cadmium-free yellow, and that's going to be on most of the plant. My husband did a little research on these, and he said that in the spring, when these leaves are starting to come out, that they will have sort of a light reddish brown, and they did. And he said then they will start to turn green, and that's the process this part of the plant was in. The leaves in the foreground, those are the 2 large ones in the back. The leaves in the foreground, we're going to use the Winsor Lemon because that is going to be more of a bright green. Those have already gone through the process of being brown and turning green, and now they're going to be a bright green. My process, though, for working on this piece is to work wet on dry. And if you watched the Beatrix Potter series, and again, I'll link that one down below as well, then you know that I tried to work as she did. And from what I've determined from looking at her art is she worked in more of a dry brush technique. She didn't have a lot of water on her brush. She couldn't have to make the marks that I'm seeing that she made in her art. So trying to emulate that, I am going to work on dry. The only water I want in my brush, you'll see me tap it quite a bit. That's to make certain I don't have too much water on my brush. I'm only going to use the water that is on the palette that I've used to mix up the color. Now, the paper I am working on is 100% cotton. It is a 140-pound paper, so it's a nice thick paper, and it's cold press. It reacts to me, it seems to react more like a hot press paper, so I can move water around a little bit more than I can with a normal cold press paper. So it's more like a hot press paper in that aspect, but I'll link that down below for you. Now we're going to get into the greens, and I'm doing something that I haven't done in my other pieces where I'm doing greenery. I'm using sap green as my green. I'm not making a green, I'm using sap green. But sap green looks different on the cadmium free yellow that we're doing right now than it will look on the Winsor lemon down below, and you'll see that as we get to that point. Now I'm only doing a little bit at a time, just a small section, because I'm wanting to keep it wet so I can move that brown color in. And I'll get some close-ups here in just a few minutes. We'll have some close-ups, but you'll notice I'm not just spreading haphazardly across the whole thing. I'm doing one tiny little leaf at a time. I want to keep them separate. I want to concentrate on each one, and I'm looking back and forth at my reference to see exactly where those colors are. I'm not making it precise, but I am using it as a guide as to how these leaves turn from the brown to the green. So it's sort of like a reverse fall is what it is. We're starting with the brown and we're going to the green. So I'll be going back and forth with the green, and then you'll see me occasionally tap over to that yellow again. And as long as I'm not letting this get too dry, I can come back in with a damp brush and I can move it around. And I want to move around that brown within the green. So the burnt umber that I have chosen, once I mix it with the green, you'll notice at the top I'm getting more of an orange effect. It is picking up on that yellow underneath, and it is giving me sort of an orange brown in there, which is perfect for those leaves. I do want a little bit more of a reddish brown though. So this is just our second layer of color. The first was the yellow. The second layer, I am working in some more yellow along with the brown and the green. And then the final layer will be the touch-ups. And that's when I'm going to add some red in with that brown and put that right at the tips of these leaves. And that's really going to hit home that those are a darker brown on the edges. So I'm going to hop off now, let you watch my process, then I'm going to jump back on in a few minutes and we'll talk some more. We are now painting in that center with the different greens, and that's where it got very confusing, where all of those leaves came together and sort of intertwined and twisted around. And that's one reason I picked that part of the plant. I loved the color, I loved the way they twisted around, but boy, was it ever a pain to draw. I am working through and I'm finding where all of them are twisting around. If you follow along with this and do it on your own, hopefully this part will help you figure out what colors to paint everything and how those little leaves are twisting around. Now, some areas I want you to see on this part, some areas like on the tip of the leaf that I'm working on right now, I did not put any green down because it was more of a yellow brown on the end. So I just took advantage of that and added that burnt umber right on top of the yellow. Now, something that's really going to help me, and this is our last area to paint with that cadmium-free yellow with the green on top, that permanent sap green, I'm going to move to those little leaves that are coming up in the foreground, and there aren't a lot of them, but thankfully some of them came up and twisted through that center, so that helped me separate all of those leaves. So I was glad for that. And you will notice once we start painting on those little leaves, since they have that Winsor lemon, they are going to be a much brighter green than the ones we just painted. As I promised, here is the alizarin crimson. I'm going to mix it with the burnt umber, and it's going to give me that lovely dark brown on the edges. I'm also reaching for ivory black, which is a color I just never use, but we're going to need it for this. You will see. Now, this is something I wanted to show you. I am putting the color on there, and you can see it kind of juxtapositions instead of blending in. So what I have to do is I have to tap my brush over on the cloth and get the excess paint and water off, and then I come back and tap right at the edge where those two colors come together, and it allows me to blend them in. And that's how I'm delivering this color to all of these areas. I don't want to use too much water on my brush. That's where Miss Potter's technique comes in very handy if I'm wanting to layer colors. If you use too much water, what you can do is activate the color underneath. Then you'll get a ballooning of watercolor. You don't want that. I don't want it to set on top and have a line and juxtaposition those colors. So if I get just a little bit of color, tap it on, then get the excess off my brush and come back and tap on those edges, it allows me to blend that out. Now, most generally when I have too much color on my brush, as I did in those areas, that's when I have to go over and tap my cloth. But if I'm careful and just tap the tip of my brush in my color and then come back and paint, I don't generally have that problem. But if you get too much on there, that's one way you can handle it, is just to clean your brush off a little bit. And now for the magic of ivory black. And this is one of the very few ways I will use black in a painting. If I add it to that cadmium-free yellow, I get a lovely green. And that's the green I need to come back and darken some of these areas in. It makes more of an olive green. I've called it a swamp green before, but it does make an appropriate green for these areas so that it will add a little bit of shadow. So I'm not wanting to add shadow with just straight black. If I'm going to use black for a shadow, I'm going to be mixing it with a color. The color I prefer most is the Payne's Gray, but Payne's Gray was going to give me a little too much blue. And I know that because I have that cheat sheet up at the top that I showed you earlier. I have it sitting in front of me out of the picture here, but I've swatched all my colors, so I knew which one would work best for me. And I do have to apologize on this part because to my sap green, I didn't realize that this was out of the camera, but I am adding some Winsor blue to that, and it's going to give me a lovely blue green. There it is. That's the Winsor blue that I added in, and it's going to give me a lovely blue green to add onto these. And I'm using the same technique. I'm putting the color down. I wanted it right in the center, and because I'm not using a lot of color on my brush, it's going to go ahead and blend in. Even though this is painting wet on dry, it is not blending the colors out, and it's allowing it to blend in. Just a few more touch-ups here with that cadmium-free yellow, and then this piece will be finished. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm always happy when you're here. I'm always happy when you comment. If you have suggestions, if you have questions, don't forget to check out the description below because that's where I will have the links for the reference on this and for other videos that may be helpful. I will have some more postcards coming up, and as promised, I will be doing some different techniques of Miss Potter to add to my Beatrix Potter series. I do have some of those coming up, but in the meantime, I'm going to be taking pictures of the flora and fauna around my house along with various weeds, and we're going to add those to some postcards. I hope you'll join me, but until then, I will see you in the next one.